In a world filled with chaos and a myriad of risks, there is opportunity. You're listening to Riding the Wave, Project Management for Emergency Managers, where we discuss how we adapt and rise above those rolling waves of hazards and threats we face, and rise to the top. And now, your host, the president of Pinnacle Performance Management, Andrew Boyarsky.
We have as our guest today on the podcast, Kit Lee Demery, who's the Senior Program Manager of Business Continuity at the legal firm Proskauer Rose. And she's also an adjunct lecturer at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where she teaches policy and decision-making in public administration and program management. Kit, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, the first question I want to begin with is, what inspired you to enter the field of emergency management?
Well, growing up, I've always known I wanted to work in an area where I can help people and make like some kind of meaningful impact on people's lives. And I know that's super cliche. I mean, who goes into EM and not want to do that, right? But I've grown up and, living life and everything like that, I've always seen people in my life go through a lot of hardships, and coupled that with media portraying distressing tragedies. And I've always thought, how can I help these people? Like, I always wanted to, I wish I could do something, anything, right? But I never knew how. I specifically remember one incident where this was during 9/11. I was at home sitting on my couch watching TV, and the news kept on, relaying the same information, showing the same awful images that you see and hear nonstop. And I remember one of the news anchors saying how like all these volunteers were distributing water and doing all these wonderful things at the World Trade Center site after it happened shortly. And I remember I was wondering how I could be one of those volunteers. Like, I wanted to help. But I had no idea how. I was young, and it was during the time where Google wasn't really a thing yet, so I couldn't go online, search for, how to get out there. And so I remember telling my parents that I wanted to go into the city and see how I could help and what I could do. But of course, they told me I was crazy because it was too dangerous, so you're not allowed to go. So I just remember just being there and just feeling so sad, so powerless and useless, and I didn't know what I could do. And I knew it from that moment that I never wanted to feel that way again. Mm. And so when, usually when, an emergency happens, normal people just run away from it. I'm the opposite. I'm the type that will jump right in and try to do anything I can to help with the situation. And then when I started applying for graduate school, that's when I learned about emergency management. And then I started working at New York City Emergency Management as the start of my career. And that's when I truly fell in love with EM.
So you've worked in a number of roles in both the public and private sector. What do you believe are the key actions to getting buy-in from leadership stakeholders, especially when the average senior executive is pressed for time, doesn't really, understand why what you're asking them to do is important? How have you engaged these leaders?
So I feel like getting buy-in is probably the number one most challenging task for an emergency management person, especially if you have a constantly changing, leadership. It could be in the city, you have a new commissioner, and now the assistant commissioners and deputies are all changing. Private sector can be the same exact thing too. Once leadership changes, it's a whole different ballgame. A couple of things come to mind for how I can, about buying in from leadership. I think the first seems kind of obvious, but it's crucial to know who your leadership is. Who are those key decision makers within an organization, right? And then determine who holds those executive positions or play those significant roles in decision making. Know your C-suite, know the brass of the agency, because if you don't know who those people are, then you won't know how to cater that buy-in to. And then the next thing is to build rapport and relationships within your agency or your company. So a lot of times I hear people say that, I'm just going to work, I'm going to do my thing, what I need to do to get paid and go home, and that's it. I'm not here to make friends, I'm not here to build relationships, none of that. But you can't really do that as an emergency management person. From my experience, those who adopt that kind of mindset tend to have difficulties garnering support. People are more willing to listen to you and help you and implement the programs that you want to implement if they know who you are. So you want to establish a good network within your organization and find that one key person that has the ears to leadership to help be an advocate for you. And then strategize. Think about what leadership wants. Put yourself in their position, right? Think about all the reasons why they may say no to you, or and then come up with some good reasons as to why no may have some sort of detrimental impact to the organization. And I think those are some of the ways where you can really help advocate for yourself. And lastly, I think, do your research. No matter if you're trying to implement a new tool, a training program, or a new process, find out what other agencies, academic institutions, or private sector companies, whatever sector you work in, what they have done that might be similar initiatives that you want to take. A lot of times we want to use this as a benchmark in our approaches with leadership, because they tend to want to know what other people are doing before they implement and see how they're using these tools or this program. And that helps solidify some of that buy-in a bit. But of course, we need to be able to be adaptable to change, right? We don't want to fall behind. So we always want to, fight the good fight. And, everything that we do as emergency managers is to protect our community. And that's something that I feel strongly about, that we should never stop fighting for.
Over your career, what methods have you used that have proven effective for emergency management, as well as business continuity program planning? Because as I see that you teach decision making and policy in public administration, especially as it concerns program management, and also in light of the need for sustainability over the long term. How do you help address challenges with implementing, mitigation and response measures in the long term? And I know for a lot of folks, when they think of mitigation, they think of, things like the physical berms and other things that go on. But there's a lot of other ways in which mitigation measures are, developed and carried out in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the first thing is to really have a good risk assessment ready, about your organization, and identify those potential hazards and vulnerabilities so that you can target those mitigation responses to those specific threats. Because if you don't know what those are, then what are you preparing for? What are you trying to mitigate, and what are you trying to respond to? Another thing is fostering cross-sector collaboration and communication with your internal departments. I think it's really important. You want to establish that strong partnership, as I mentioned earlier, because this really ensures a good coordination and efficient response to not only during emergencies, but also, it'll help strengthen your EM and BC program because you have that relationship built. And then we all know as EMers, training and exercises are, important. Regular exercises not only enhances our preparedness, right, for the organization, but it also helps us identify what areas we need to improve upon. And then if you train people, we want everyone to be on the same page. No one emergency is the same. We want people to be able to be prepared for anything. And so it's also a great way using training to have community engagement in that sense. And then the last thing I think of is technology. Technology shouldn't be feared. As we see, we're learning about AI now, and it's a little scary sometimes with AI. But at the same time, there's so many tools out there that can really help you, right? And if you have the budget and the ability to, I say implement these things because it serves a good purpose. It really takes the legwork out of an emergency manager and a business continuity professional. I always say the goal is to work smarter, not harder. And so technology can really help out with that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Recently, the newly installed president of IAEM, it's always a mouthful when you say that acronym, the International Association of Emergency Managers, Justin Cates, who's a contact of mine in my network. He said that one of the things that's important for him is, how do we engage with technology? How do we utilize the what is it currently in the ether, and as far as artificial intelligence, to our advantage, to enhance our work. We do fear technology, but we have to embrace it in many ways. It's we've got to provide the value added and be the human in the loop when it comes to those sorts of things. So good point on that.
Absolutely, I agree.
So one thing I think on that note, and since I just taught a course on program management for the American Management Association. I want to ask the question, how many of you are also program or project managers, and you're also doing the work as part of the team? I think almost every hand went up. So how do you handle your work being a one-man band? And I should correct that, being saying, I know that's the common saying. People of our generation are used to hearing the one-man band. I should correct it and say a one-person band.
Yes, so being a one-person band has its challenges. Depending on the organization that you work for, it could be a big one or a small one. It's a heavy task. What I've learned that I've had to do is really rely on my support network, not only internally, but also externally. Internally, I have to, identify who can be part of my, what I call like a incident response team, basically. So in some cases, I kind of build my own. If I have several offices or whatever it may be, I identify key individuals in those areas to come together and basically help me during an incident and basically show them how it impacts them and why they need to be part of that response. Like generally, you always need someone from security, right? Generally, you always need someone from the IT department, because if you have a power outage somewhere, then your servers are down, and what are you going to do? So I have these group of people within my own organization that I can, leverage for help and things like that. But then sometimes when you're, doing all that, and if you're by yourself and you're the only one who's the subject matter expertise in this area, sometimes you start to forget, or not, I don't know if forget is the right word, but you kind of feel like you're in your own silo because you don't really have that other professional who's in the same field as you to bounce off ideas within your same organization. It's like, oh, I wanna do this training for my offices, but how well received do you think it will be, or what other nuances do I need to incorporate in this and that? And so I rely a lot also on my outside network. So I do a lot of networking, and I try to do as much networking as I can. One, I like meeting people, and I'm just generally a people person, and get to learn about folks and what they do in their sector. And I work with them, with my peers, and I'll set up separate meetings outside of work, and basically have conversations with them, brainstorm with them, see how they approach certain situations and how they respond to certain situations. That way, when something happens, what you're doing are the right steps, and that you might even gain more ideas when speaking to other people as well. And plus, when there's an emergency that occurs, the great thing is that you have this network now that you can utilize to help you with your responses also. So you build a good partnership with, say, NYPD or the FBI or DHS or FEMA or OEM, you can, if you build a good enough a relationship, you can text them, you can email them, you can call them, and they'll be more than willing to help. And that really contributes to how you respond in your own organization.
Yeah, that's a really good points. And one of the things is I always teach in my classes, especially for the younger generation, it's not just the know-how, it's the know-who.
Mhm.
It's and not just at, senior levels. We talk about, making sure that we get the buy-in, sponsorship, and things like that, and cultivating that connection with leadership, as mentioned before. But it's also folks at our level and also at lower levels in the organization. It could be when it's interesting during Hurricane Sandy. I remember I was deployed out to some of the various schools to help with emergency sheltering. And during the course of the training that we had done in the prior years, made me familiar with so many folks. When I showed up there and I saw the head custodian for some of those facilities, and say, "Hey, how you doing?" They remembered me, and they were like, "What can I do to help?" That just changes everything. It really opens the door.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the more people you meet, the better too, for you. And, it's really helpful. And you're right, it opens the door to, not only opportunities also for you, but also, willing to help and information sharing, resources. Like people are very helpful when they want to be, of course.
Yeah. Well, especially in an emergency situation,
Yes.
I think those particular situations like Hurricane Irene, Sandy, certainly some of the more recent, people come out
Mhm.
and, as you said, there are going to be those people who rush to help when there's an emergency. So that's what you got you started, and that's what keeps you going. So
Absolutely.
you teach public administration at John Jay and conduct hands-on training for emergency response. What do you feel are core competencies that the next generation need to have to be effective as an emergency or a crisis response manager?
I would say having problem-solving analytical skills, because you want to be able to use those skills in diverse settings, right? So it doesn't matter what sector you go into, you should be able to use those skills. You want to be able to have also strong collaborative skills and with diverse stakeholders, and having effective communication skills is very, very important. You want to not only be able to use your communication skill to facilitate, and coordinate between various entities, but you want to also use those communication skills to be able to convey complex information to your audience in a way that they can understand. Is we use a lot of jargon. There are a ton of acronyms like IAM. There's so many out there, and someone may not know what an EAP or EOC is or anything like that. And so we have to remember to speak like a normal person. And the only way to do that is to have that communication skill and stop thinking like an EM person for a second and talk like other people. And then, the drive for continuous learning is very important. Like you want to be able to, you want to make sure that you're embracing professional development training. You want to learn the best practices. You never want to fall behind, and again, network, network, network. Very important. Build that professional network, collaborate with your peers, learn from others in the field. They're a great source of information and, great people to brainstorm with. Um, Another thing I can say is, internships, volunteer work, those are really great ways to gain experience. And, when you first start out, focus on getting that experience rather than making the big bucks. I know that's easier said than done because we all want to make a lot of money. But, the money will come as you grow in your career. Start out learning and gain as much experience as you want. And then, I also think that a lot of times we tend to forget to focus on ourselves. We need to learn ways to, cope with stress and challenges. So I think that's one key thing for, young professionals is to learn that. This is a field that's very challenging, very stressful, but yet very rewarding. But we don't want to forget about, why you want to be in this field. When you're under a lot of stress or facing tons of obstacles, sometimes we forget why we are in our field. And so we can't forget that. So mental health and overall health is number one. Because we always, focus on our jobs and how we serve our community and things like that. And then one last thing would be when you're working whatever sector you're in, consider the social, economic, and cultural aspects of that sector. EM and BC principles are all the same across the board, but the way how emergency management business continuity is practiced may vary across sectors. So you need to know the different needs of each sector and the ways you can reach those communities. So if you're working in an academic institution, you have faculty, staff, and you have students. You can't, train people the same way, all the same way. You can't initiate the same program for everyone. So things need to be tweaked a little. So it's important that you learn about everything about the place that you work at.
So what would you tell, what are some of the things that you would tell an audience of folks about the work in emergency management business continuity? Why should they get into this type of work?
They should get into this type of work because it is so rewarding, even though it is stressful, but you learn how to adapt to various things in life. No matter how crazy a situation will be, you know how to stay cool, calm and collected, basically, right? And you know how to respond with a proper mind, I guess, and not be terrified of every little situation. I've seen a lot of folks who don't go through training or who are not in the field. When there's when a crisis occurs, they don't know what to do and they just freeze. For emergency management, you develop all these skills to know how to be that calm, cool, collected person to do that. And also, at the end of the day, it's also not a boring job. Every day is different. You can be writing a plan one day and the next day, there's a civil unrest happening, as things like that are happening right now, or or there's an earthquake or a hurricane happening, and so your days are always different. One thing I knew about what I wanted to do growing up was that I didn't want to be stagnant and I didn't want repetitive work. I found that to be very boring. Mm-hmm. And so this job is not boring. And you get to meet some really cool people along the way too. So yeah, become an emergency manager or a business continuity person.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It was great talking to you about your work in emergency management business continuity and what it takes to manage stakeholders throughout the chain.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This was great, and thank you for having me today.
We had as our guest Kit Lee Demery, who is the Senior Manager of Business Continuity at the legal firm of Proskauer Rose. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Riding the Wave, hosted by Andrew Boyarsky, President of Pinnacle Performance Management and Clinical Associate Professor in Emergency and Project Management at NYU and John Jay College.